Welcome to the Protecting Your Nest podcast. Most diets that encourage the consumption of whole foods will improve the health of the population compared to the standard diets that are consumed in most countries. What has been an ongoing problem, however, is that when dietary recommendations are not aligned with the mainstream, many in the world of nutrition will push back, even when they don't have strong evidence to not support dietary approaches other than the ones they believe in. It is therefore important that when this happens, that we have strong voices who are willing to push back so that those who are looking for solutions when other options have failed them have alternatives, and more importantly, the knowledge they will need to achieve a different dietary approach. Today, I wanted to have a conversation about the carnivore diet with someone who has become a strong voice in the carnivore community and one that I feel will add value to your life. Today's guest is Dr. Anthony Chaffee. Dr. Chaffee was a former All-American rugby player who eventually transitioned to the medical profession. He is a medical doctor and nutrition researcher focused on animal foods to optimize health and performance. And he is the host of the wonderful Plant-Free MD podcast, the Carnivore Fix Facebook group, and is doing really well with his YouTube channel, Dr. Anthony Chaffee, where he posts interviews, short clips, and in-depth content. And with that, Dr. Chaffee, I welcome you to the Protecting Your Nest podcast.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, I'm definitely appreciating you. I saw two large structures when I was at KetoCon. One was Dr. Sean Baker, and the other was you. So I was really happy to meet you guys at KetoCon. It was a nice conference, and I definitely enjoyed your presentation as well. So really appreciate you joining me. And I think it's important we continue to spread the message that carnivore is not a bad way to go. But many people are so afraid of it because they know not the details. So today I want to talk a little bit about some of the details. But before we dive in, Doc, I wanted to hear a little bit about, why a doctor is saying to the world, I'm not eating plants, and let's talk about that. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about your day, your typical day. I know you're busy. You're a resident doctor. Lord have mercy, in neurosurgery for all things, right? So first of all, how you have time to even have a conversation with me, have a YouTube channel, do all the things you're doing. But what's the day in the life of Dr. Anthony? How do you spend your typical day?
Yeah, well, typically I am working at the hospital. All aspects of medicine are obviously very, very busy. Neurosurgery is quite busy as far as the specialties go as well. So a lot of my hours are done there. So I wake up very early. I get into the hospital. I get everything ready for the rounds, and then I go around see the patients. I'm either in surgery or in clinic, or dealing with consults and sick patients, and often on call overnight, once or twice, sometimes 3 or 4 times a week. And that is technically on call, but for us, that means you're working constantly, and you're getting harassed by phone calls at all hours, and are generally in the hospital seeing sick people, admitting patients, or doing surgery. So it's very busy. I actually just finished about a 40-hour stint because you work overnight and then you work the next day. So that's like 36 hours. Yesterday was a bit longer because I actually had worked all day at the hospital, worked all night on call, and then I actually did clinic work. I do private clinic outside of my residency in functional medicine, bariatric medicine, trying to help people get better, like sort of preventative medicine, you could call it. And, getting people healthy, getting people, helping them with weight loss, and getting them better so they don't need horrible surgeries in the first place. And so that's my Saturday. So I usually have about one day off a week on Sundays, and otherwise it's just pretty busy. And then I maybe have a couple hours in the evening where I'll try to do a workout, and I'll try to do my podcast stuff and interviews, and get all my content ready. And so being on carnivore is very, very helpful for that, because I generally just eat once a day, and so that's usually in the evening. I'll come back, I'll get all my things done, and then I'll have, big steak or two, and then I'm good. I'm good for the next day. So that's typical day is being way too busy.
Yeah, and I am so thankful you found carnivore because I agree. That really makes it easier when you only eat once a day. I did see your video where you kind of showed, how you prepare your meat, and that was kind of a cool video to kind of. It's very simple, straightforward, and it tastes delicious, by the way. So hey, keep up that good work. And in the United States, there is they do have new rules of engagement, so they typically. In most specialties, they don't allow you to do 36 hours, but it's people have no clue what it's like to train to be a physician. So, and particularly with neurosurgery. So we'll keep our prayers that you can survive this. But at least you have the diet part and the exercise part down for sure. So, but you have a family as well. So, when you make these what are perceived as extreme dietary changes, there's an interesting reaction from people in the community and certainly in your family. So, how has your family looked at your journey? Has any of them taken a similar journey?
Yeah, well, everyone in my family was interested in what I was doing, just because I came across this sort of academically. I didn't see like an influencer and go, oh, that's what I'm going to do to change my life. I had about 20 years back sort of research and experiences that all culminated into me having this aha moment that, like, okay, no, humans actually are carnivores biologically. This is the type of animal that we are. And this is our most appropriate and optimal diet. Because of that, I had a lot of facts and evidence behind me, and I, approached it like that. And I never tried to pitch it to any of my family. I was just interested myself. This was what I was doing for me, but I was really digging into the research to see exactly what we knew, exactly what we had discovered, and what we could prove. And so I was just making discoveries, and I was asking questions, and I was testing it against the literature. One of my favorite authors, Thomas Sowell, said that if you have two competing theories, you should be able to find evidence with which to test them against. And so I just started testing these things and asking questions. If the diets we eat, the food we eat, affects different sorts of diseases, you should see this in the literature, and you sort of dig into that. If sugar is a factor in autism, we're going to have some studies. There are studies that actually show that formula-fed babies have higher rates of autism than breastfed babies, or that vegans and vegetarians have higher rates of autism as well. So, and a ton of other ones that show that autism has a connection with diet. So, just asking these questions, looking in the literature, and sort of seeing what we knew. And as such, my family just saw how excited I was, and I was telling them, "Oh, look at this study, look at this." And eventually, my parents started approaching me and asking me about questions on if they got started and what would they eat. And I asked them, "Are you thinking about trying this?" And they said, "Well, yeah, we kind of are. Just sort of try it for a month." And they did, and they had very, very good results. My mom, really, really cut down on her diabetes medication, reduced her insulin. She's type 2 diabetic, but she's insulin dependent, and reduced her insulin dependency significantly, came off most of her oral medications. And in 2 months, her HbA1c went from 8.9 down to 6.1, which is very high to, borderline
Mm-hmm.
non-diabetic. And so, her doctor was very impressed by this, was actually shocked by this. Said, what the hell did you do? How the hell did you do this? This doesn't happen. Diabetes is a progressive disease. It only gets worse. We can mitigate it and modify it through diet, exercise, and medication, but you can't reverse it. How the hell did you do
Mm-hmm.
this? And
Mm-hmm.
so, because of those good results, my parents have stayed on this. They've been on for going on 5 years now. And then my other family members have just started eating more and more meat. And then my brother started doing it himself. And when they try it, they just get better results. My girlfriend now is at the time, she didn't really eat. She ate meat, but she just had a standard diet, and just through osmosis, she just started eating more. Being
Right.
influenced by me, we started getting more and more meat, and then finally just decided, okay, I'll try it for a while, and just felt really, really good by it. So they've been very supportive of me doing it for myself. I never got any pushback from that side of things, and I never pushed it on them. But just through, the years and sort of seeing the things that I was doing, they've been more and more interested. So I've actually, started coming on to it themselves, which is great because it's always
Mhm.
good to see my family healthy because I love them.
Yeah, it's a gift to find something that's healing you, and not only it's nice to heal the world, and
Mm.
people who hear this conversation are in the world beyond family. But I tell you, when you can help people in your own family, it's such a gift because, like you say, you just love your family so much, and you want them to be here as long as possible. That's the gift of hopefully being a clinician and being able to read studies and understand them. And I particularly appreciate that you did start with the science. I think all clinicians should. And I also appreciate that you allow people to kind of find you, come to you. You didn't like, push it onto them. I think it's best that you model for people, and then when they need help, you coach them. So I love that, and I think that's a message for those who are watching or listening to take on. So but it is still odd to have a physician who says, I'm not eating plants in a world where plants are supposed to save us from all the chronic medical conditions. So, um, when did you realize that the dietary guidelines were not serving you, and yeah, what was that moment like? And just talk a little bit about that. And what did it do for you personally?
Well, I mean, I guess it ultimately started probably about 22 years ago when I was taking cancer biology, my undergraduate degree at the University of Washington in Seattle, and we were just learning about the toxic nature of plants. This is botany 101. This is not new information. This is any textbook can tell you this. This is plants use defense chemicals to stop animals from eating them because all nature's kill or be killed for plants as well as animals. So they need to have defenses as well. And while they can't run away or fight back, they'll have to have other sorts of defenses. And one of them is by using these defense chemicals. And so we were learning that, and specifically learning in a cancer context and learning about all the different carcinogens that were in plants. Like Brussels sprouts, for example, had 136 known human carcinogens in them 22 years ago, and mushrooms had over 100, spinach, kale, broccoli, lettuce, celery, cabbage, cucumber, all these things. They all had like 60 or 80 or over 100 known carcinogens each. So we were quite taken aback by that. Obviously, that shook everything. And I remember being very surprised by this. Everyone was literally looking around wildly, just thinking like someone must be in
Mm.
on this joke. And no one was. And I was just looking for a TA in the corner, like snickering or something like that. But no, so it wasn't that. And it sort of dawned on us that like, no, this guy's serious. And even then, I was thinking like, but vegetables are still good for you though, right? And he just looked at us and he said, I don't eat salad. I don't eat vegetables. I don't let my kids eat vegetables. Plants are trying to kill you. So I was like, right, forget plants. And I just stopped eating them. And that's inadvertently went to a carnivore diet, inadvertently started eating optimally for my biology. And I felt absolutely amazing. Because I was always interested in science and biology and medicine. And, I wanted to fuel my body as well as it could because I was playing high level rugby and sports. That was really important to me, and so they really really clicked together very well. I didn't think of it as far as the dietary guidelines. I just knew that plants were trying to kill me and I wasn't going to touch them. And so I just ate those, and then I ended up slipping off of that way of eating when I was in England playing professionally, playing rugby professionally there. And some of the meat was breaded or crumbed, and I didn't quite
Mhm.
have the same access as I did in America. And I remember thinking, I was like, well, does it make that big of a difference? Like a bit of crumbing on it, like poison, poison is in the dosage and all that sort of stuff. And so I sort of convinced myself that it was okay to eat some of these things, and that was just a slippery slope. I then didn't have that barrier of saying like I'm
Mhm.
not eating any plants whatsoever. And then I was like, oh, okay, I have a little bit here and there and there, and it just sort of creeped in. And then there's a big plant push. All the big books came out, like Dr. Furman's
Mhm.
Gomes book and everything. It's just like, oh, you have to go plant based, you have to go this, you have to go that. And so it just sort of crept in. I never really bought into it all the way just because of that background. I was always very meat based, but I started incorporating it into my vegetables and mushrooms and things like that. And then, sort of 5 or so years ago, I came across Dr. Baker, Sean Baker on Joe Rogan's podcast. My brothers first introduced me to it and said, "Hey, there's this guy. He's a doctor. He played professional rugby, and he says you can get all the nutrients you need from meat." And at first, it was like, well, that doesn't make sense. But then it dawned on me, like, well, I actually did that for like 5 years, and I've
Mm-hmm.
never felt better in my entire life. So I was like, all right, well, I'll watch it and let you know what I think. And within 5 minutes, I was like, okay, this guy's more right than he knows. Like, there's so much that goes into this. Plants being toxic, cholesterol actually being good for you, fructose being really implicated in the diabetes and heart disease, and a bunch of other things. And so that just clicked in, and I just said, that was it. That's what I was doing. I was eating as a carnivore. We actually are carnivores. That's what all the best evidence shows, that we evolved as carnivores, and biologically we're supposed to eat meat, and then plants are trying to kill you. And I was like, right, I knew it. I knew plants were trying to kill me. Forget these things. I just tossed them out and just started eating, fatty meat again. And I just felt absolutely amazing. I lost 23 pounds in the first 10 days. Most of that got to be water weight, because you carry a lot of inflammation from these things. And then I was working out a lot, and I had a lot of energy to work out a lot. Didn't feel good before then, even just eating vegetables and meat. And so I wasn't feeling great. I was doing humanitarian work in the refugee camps in Bangladesh for between 2017 and 2018. I had just come back from that. And so I was really out of shape, and I was really trying to get back into shape to play rugby. And within 2 weeks, I still didn't look like I was in shape, but I felt amazing. I was like, right, I'm back in it. Let's go. And I felt great. And I was sprinting and running and hitting and lifting weights, and my body just started changing.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I just started stacking on muscle and shredding fat, and then sort of got to a steady state about 6 months later. And I've been basically the same body composition since then. And so I really wanted to know exactly what we knew, exactly what we could prove, and exactly what we needed to
Mm-hmm.
explore and experiment on. And so I just dug into the literature, and I just started finding so many disparities between the literature and the recommendations and the
Mm-hmm.
reality. So, we'd have a lot of different things in medicine, as I'm sure you know, that obviously you learn in medical school, and you come out and they go, oh, okay, oh, actually that one's not quite right. And,
Mm-hmm.
you have
Right.
to readjust. And you have to stay current. That's what the whole point of continuing medical education is that new stuff comes out and new understandings come out. And so many things just did not align with the official recommendations. And also, why would they? This is done by bureaucrats and politicians, not scientists and doctors. They get recommendations from scientists and doctors who may or may not have influences in certain industries, or may be completely benevolent and intelligent,
Mm-hmm.
people. But either way, they're not the ones sort of making those recommendations. Those recommendations come from bureaucrats, and so
Mm-hmm. That's
the
right.
literature isn't going to line up with that. And I've just found example after example after example of things that we take for granted in medicine, or at least many people do, that are based in very, very flimsy evidence, or maybe even just best guess at the time, and it fit the observed phenomena. But that experiment later found that no, actually that's not true. It's sometimes the opposite. So that really opened my eyes. So that was sort of 4 or 5 years ago that I really dug into that, and that's when I was like, okay, yeah, this is all wrong.
This is it. That's incredible. I shout out to Gary Tabbs and Nina Teichos for helping us to, dig into the evidence and see things. It took journalists to provide clarity. So I think that's so important. And what's interesting about your comments is the biological sciences should tell us things. And I kind of missed the lecture you saw where it said that plants are, carcinogens. They're trying to kill us. And so I think that some of what I hope is being taught is that there's an evolution so that clinicians can hear that and at least in that moment say, hey, maybe there's something wrong here. And I just feel like it's not being taught. So, and yeah, Dr. Furman, other people, I mean, I was pretty much indoctrinated into the plant-based methodology. I was a vegan/vegetarian for 8 years. And again, you feel better than the standard American diet, or the standard diet elsewhere in other countries. But man, when I started to go down carb restriction, low carb keto, and mostly favoring meat right now, you feel so much better. So you have to listen to your body. And it's so nice to know that a diet like this could potentially help autism. I just had a guest, Natasha Trenev, who was the mother of probiotics, and she is using probiotics to help people with autism. And what we do know is that the current treatment, the current approaches to autism are not living up to expectations. So it's nice to know that diet and maybe things to help your gut as well, like probiotics, may be helpful. So I'm really interested in what she's doing, and certainly if carnivore can help autism, that's going to be awesome. So let's look a little bit into this idea. I've listened to some of your work on YouTube, great YouTube channel, by the way. And I like it because other than interviews like this, you also explain things. So we get a chance to have a lecture and you dive into the science. And one of the things you talked about fairly recently at KetoCon was, this idea that we were made to be hunters. And I think that's really important for people to kind of look back a little bit and understand, why choosing meat as a primary source of fuel is a good idea. So share a little bit of the research that you found as it relates to us being hunters as opposed to plant eaters.
Yeah, so there is quite a lot, and it looks that our ancestors sort of split off from other primates about sort of 8 million years ago, because they started eating meat, and they started out as scavengers, likely just sort of eating small things or carrion, and then developed into our modern iterations. There's obviously big spectrum between them, but some of the early things. We dealt with the limitations of our anatomy. We're not lions, we're not wolves. We don't have the natural capabilities to tear down and rip apart an animal. So we actually had to figure out other ways. And one of those was tools. So we found carrion animals, and there's in the fossil record going back millions of years before worked stone tools. There's evidence that these animals were using stones to crack open the skulls of animals and get at the brains. And so they started doing that. So they're using stones for quite a long time. And then about 3.3 million years ago, they find sort of the first worked stone tools, and those, being used to cut into meat, tear open animals. And there's a lot of, evidence on the bones of these animals where you can actually see these stone tools sort of dug in, and we can actually show quite clearly. It's not a guess. It's as good as you can get, really, when working with something that's millions of years old, but it's very, very good evidence. You can see the difference between, a tooth or a claw, biting into something, and a stone tool hacking into a bone. So, we have good evidence of that this is how they were being used. As a result, we started getting different changes. Our jaws got smaller, teeth got smaller because we're eating softer food. We're not chewing on sticks and leaves all day like a gorilla does. And, and then our brains got bigger because we had to use our brains to figure out how to take down something that outclassed us by every physical metric, like a mammoth. And so we figured out tools and tactics. We used fire, we drove them off cliffs, and we used the stone tools to cut them up at the bottom. We also developed a rotational shoulder, and we can throw things very fast. Even just an average adult male can throw at around 60 miles an hour, like throw a baseball around 60 miles an hour, whereas a chimpanzee would only be able to do it about 20 miles an hour, even though they're actually stronger than we are by a lot of respects. So it has that rotational capacity is, for throwing rocks and then eventually spears and other weapons to use in hunting. We also have forward-facing eyes. So this is a very, very typical feature of animals that are hunting. You need to have this 3D vision to try and track these animals down. Whereas prey animals, they generally towards the side of their head, so they get a wider range of vision, so they can see what's sneaking up on them. So you have all these characteristics and changes over time that are in keeping with hunting. Even our vision, people say that color vision, this is to look at different colored fruits and berries because we're going to be eating these things. And that's as may be. But just because we had started off with color vision doesn't mean that that just goes away when we start eating meat. In order to lose a trait evolutionarily, it has to provide a survival advantage to lose that trait. So, and in fact, you do see people that are colorblind or even red green
Mm-hmm.
colorblind. We find that in fact, this actually helps you see at low light, at dusk and dawn, and also can see differences like animals hiding in the leaves. It sort of, you can see them a little clearer. So there's a better contrast if you are colorblind. And I've actually, this is something that's sort of been described, and I've even spoken to people who are hunters and they're red green colorblind. They're like, yeah, it's absolutely amazing. I can see people, I can see animals and deer far easier than my colleagues
Mm-hmm.
when they're out there. So that's another one that provided an advantage as well, and people started sort of losing that color vision as well. It's not uncommon. It's fairly often you'll find someone with this, but having color vision potentially can be useful in other ways, which is why it probably hasn't gone
Mm-hmm.
out completely. So yeah, those are just some of the things that we see that show that we're anatomically and biologically hunters.
Yeah, and it's just good to have perspective. I think if you talk to a vegan, they will try to, reframe that conversation. But I think when people are hearing perspectives, which is why I'm open to all perspectives, you hear the perspective, uh, ask yourself, does this make sense? Maybe do some more research, and then you go from there. So I really appreciate us giving perspective to this conversation. Another perspective that I was able to see was a recent video by Sean Baker, and he discussed Rich Rowe, who's a ultra endurance athlete, vegan, and unfortunately, and we definitely wish him well. He's struggling with musculoskeletal issues. He reminds me of Michelle Hearn, who is a runner as well in the low carb community. I'll be seeing her at the Metabolic Health Symposium that's sponsored by the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners in August, I think on the 25th. And she struggled physically. She literally started to deteriorate. And when I talked to her during my podcast interview with her, she struggled and she suffered. And then not until she added the animals back did she start to heal. So I'm not sure what's going to happen with Rich Rowe, what he's going to do, but I just wish him well and hope that if lack of animals is what's causing his deterioration, hopefully he'll start to see that. So if you were to, um, that statement you made earlier, which was it's such a strong statement. Plants are trying to kill you, right? What would you say to a vegan who is doing their best to be healthy? They're really trying to find the ideal diet, which is why I was vegan, vegetarian for years. What would you say to them to help emphasize why plants? What is it about plants that makes them harmful to the human body?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. People go vegan or vegetarian for so many different reasons, and so I'm not one of those people that have any animosity towards these people, because you put a lot of
Absolutely.
thought and you put a lot of effort into this, and I mean that's a radical change. Going carnivore is a radical change, but anytime you step away from the norm, it's difficult. You're going to catch grief from people, and it's going to be just harder because you're not going to have as many available options. So people that do these things, they generally put a lot of thought into it, and they've weighed a lot of options. They say this is going to be the best thing for me for whatever reason. And so I just think that they've just been a bit misled, and they've been given information that's not as accurate as it could be. One of those things is that, like you say, plants are the best thing that we can ever eat and is going to reverse all these diseases. I think it's the opposite, honestly. I think that, in fact, that so-called chronic diseases that we treat are not actually diseases per se, but toxicities and malnutrition, toxic buildup of a species inappropriate diet, and lack of species specific nutrition. So too many plants, not enough animals, as we can see by the fact that when people stop eating plants, they stop eating especially sugar and processed garbage. These diseases go away, just like my mom and her diabetes just sort of disappeared. we're seeing this in autoimmune issues and diabetes and heart disease and even cancer. Professor Thomas Seyfried has put out a ton of research on this in animal models, and to the point that people, like cedar cyanide is incorporating like a therapeutic ketosis model for treating cancer as well, because this helps. So what I would point out is that you know plants are living organisms just like everything else, and so they want to stay living organisms, and if you eat them they die, so they don't have a natural instinct to let you eat them. And you can think about this quite plainly by going into the woods, and if you run out of food you can't just eat any random plant, right? Most of them will make you very, very sick or even kill you. I mean, I think most people are familiar with the concept of edible and inedible plants. So obviously the concept exists that plants, at least some of them contain poison. So then it's just explaining that no, this applies to all plants. And it's not that spinach isn't poisonous, it's just that because of our heritage we have some defenses to those chemicals. But spinach will kill other animals. It's not like a benign plant. So if you haven't evolved to eat a specific plant, that plant is bad for you. And because we've been out of that sort of evolutionary game for about 2 million years, we've lost some of these abilities. Now, some populations have been exposed to agriculture a little longer than others. And so they have some resistances to some of these foods. But you compare that to, say, like European populations and Native American populations or Native Australian populations. The Native Americans, Native Australians, when eating a Western diet, are 4 times as likely to develop heart disease, diabetes, cancer, and all the rest. So this is an exposure relationship, and so I just try to explain that and just just discuss. I mean, this is basic botany on how these things work, and so when you sort of get that idea that, okay, well, there's some plants that are bad for you, yes, I understand that. And then you can sort of show that this is just a natural way that plants defend themselves. And then you can start to go into the evidence of the fact that we haven't really eaten these things in a long time, and just, and so won't have the same defenses against them. That's usually where I start with that.
Yeah, that's a good place. I'll be honest, going back to my conventional training, didn't learn much about harm that plants can cause us. It took my nutrition and functional medicine training to even hear terms, like anti-nutrients. I never heard those terms before. I never knew what a phytate was, a tannin, a lectin, oxalate. Those things didn't even exist in my vocabulary. So I think if you're watching this podcast and or video, I think it's important that you do yourself a favor and just look up these things and learn simple principles, like only 3% of the iron that you're trying to get from spinach is actually going to be bioavailable to you, but it's probably in a 35% range if it's from beef or liver. So I think if you don't know that, you'll think, well, I'm doing fine eating spinach, and the reality is that you may not. So I think that's important, and also listen to your body. There are certain plants I eat and have eaten that I just don't eat anymore because they just make me not. I get a little upset stomach. I get gas, and people say, well, that's you'll get used to that. Well, I never got used to it. I was a vegetarian/vegan for 8 years, and tons of things I tried to eat, I never got accustomed to. And I got tired of feeling gas, etc. So I think that's the message I would give as well. And more messages we need to speak to. And the other is this idea of saturated fat. So many people in society today, in fact, that you keep hearing all these observational studies keep coming out. Don't eat meat, don't eat eggs. And I say, didn't we do the RCTs? Didn't we do the randomized controlled trials? So why are we even bothering with these poorly done food frequency questionnaire studies, right? Looking at data, and clearly they only show associational correlation, and they're not really strong evidence. So talk a little bit about this fear of saturated fat, because you can't eat carnivore if you're afraid of saturated fat. Just explain that so that people won't fear that.
Yeah, I mean, there's such weight of inertia behind this, going back, to 1977 USDA declaration that cholesterol causes heart disease and saturated fat increases cholesterol. Therefore, saturated fat is bad. But saturated fat is actually a very important nutrient. We talk about essential fatty acids, and a lot of these come from saturated animal fats.
Mm-hmm.
Fat makes the animal kingdom go round, really. By and large, animals run on saturated fat, even herbivores. We think that they eat this fibrous plants and they get the constituent molecules in that fibrous plant, but they actually don't. They sort of more like cultivate bacteria in their intestines, like ruminants will cultivate these bacteria that will eat the fiber for their own use, and then their waste is actually short chain fatty acids, which are 100% saturated, and that's what the ruminant or the cow or the animal actually absorbs. So there's a difference between what they eat and what they absorb. So they're eating fibrous plants, but they're absorbing saturated fat, and then when those bacteria die off, they get broken down and they get absorbed and they get protein from that as well. So it's actually a high fat, high protein diet as well. Carnivores, obviously, they're eating animals with fat on them, and they go for the fat first, and so it's a very important survival nutrient. They really need that. So, it does not follow that we would be an animal, basically the only animal that saturated fat would be bad for. I don't know of any other examples besides humans that people have even suggested this. So it really comes from that declaration that cholesterol is bad and saturated fat increases cholesterol. And this has actually been thoroughly debunked. It's not even, well, we have some studies that say this. Like, no, we have historical documentation showing that the original studies and even the 1977 declaration from the USDA were bought and paid for by the sugar companies, and they were fraudulent. The Journal of American Medical Association published these in 2015. It came out of University of California, San Francisco Medical School. They published this and showed that, from the sugar company's own records, that they paid off 3 Harvard professors to falsify data and publish fraudulent studies to make it appear as if cholesterol caused heart disease when it was really sugar. And one of those professors was named head of the USDA, and it was he who authored and published the 1977 declaration. But obviously he's compromised. And you look back at their studies, look back at their data, you see that they cherry picked things to make it look one way when it was actually another. And they actually had data, like Ansel Keys is a classic example of that with the 7 Nations study. And he said that, these 7 nations, and as they increase in saturated fat and cholesterol, their exponential increase in heart disease. But he had complete data for, I think it was 23 different countries, and they were just scattered all over the map. So there wasn't even a correlation. And as you say, all of these, there wasn't a single study that ever showed causation between saturated fat or LDL cholesterol and heart disease, and only correlative studies. But obviously, you cannot prove causation through correlation, right? But if you show that there's no correlation, that proves there is no causation, because you have to have a correlation.
That's right.
To even start this conversation on causation. So there wasn't even a correlation. They knew that full well, and that's what all the big studies post 2015 really have come out and shown, with hundreds of thousands of people, showing that higher LDL cholesterol is actually protective against heart disease and stroke, same with saturated fat, and that people over the age of 60 who have higher LDL cholesterol are living longer, living more independently, less likely to go to nursing homes, less likely to have Alzheimer's and dementia. So saturated fat is really one of your best friends, and it is a very important molecule. Cholesterol is as well. Every single cell in your body is made out of cholesterol. I learned that in 8th grade. So, in life sciences, I remember looking at that in the textbook, that our cell membranes were made out of cholesterol. I remember thinking, I was like, how can cholesterol be bad for us? We're made out of cholesterol. And, and most of our hormones as well, our steroid hormones like, testosterone, estrogen, progestogens, mineralocorticoids, glucocorticoids, these are all made from, cholesterol. So, and so many other things as well. So this is a universally beneficial molecule, and we just need to undo this aversion we have to it. There's data and literature going back, into the 1800s that I've looked at, all talking about fat is very important. It's very satiating. It will help you lose weight. Fatty meat is the way to go. This is the healthiest way to go. And we threw all of that out. We threw it all out after that 1977 declaration. So the information is all there. We just have to sort of
Mhm.
rediscover it and undo that burden of misinformation.
Well, I'm gonna help my followers to undo it with this statement that you just made. So I just looked at the Journal of the American College of Cardiology. So we'll put a link in the show notes to this video, and it states that the U.S. dietary guidelines recommend the restriction of saturated fat intake to less than 10% of calories to reduce cardiovascular disease, but so, and the foods that they are talking about are like, whole fat, dairy, dark chocolate, and, unprocessed meat. But they're saying that, guess what? After looking at the research, it's not associated with an increased risk of cardiovascular disease and diabetes risk. There is no robust evidence that current population wide arbitrary upper limits of saturated fat consumption in the US will prevent cardiovascular disease or reduce mortality. So this is not, what's shameful is that you have to go to a freaking podcast to get this information. Why can't I just go to CNN? Breaking news.
Yeah.
Breaking news. Saturated fat does not cause heart disease. And even when large organizations like the Journal of the American College of Cardiology put out a position statement, we still have to deal with this. So I think it's important we get this message out, because not only are the patients fearful of saturated fat, the clinicians are fearful of saturated fat. So thank you for kind of touching on that point, because so many people fear that. Another thing that had me kind of locked into this vegetarian way of thinking was the blue zones argument. So many, it just felt like real good science, So there's this argument that, well, people who live the longest, they live in the blue zones. And I literally sit on a panel with Congressman Danny Davis on Mondays, should I say, couch conversations with the doctors on Facebook, YouTube, and we have conversations. And one of my fellow panelists is a very strong vegetarian, Dr. Terry Mason, well respected. He's been in documentaries in the past, Forks Over Knives, as an example, and he quotes that blue zones argument often. So I guess what I would say to you is, when you think about that blue zones argument, that plants are the best diet, the people who live the longest, that's where they are from. Is there an argument that would help a non meat eater to understand that may not be the best argument to make for this?
Yeah, I think that the Blue Zone study was problematic, to say the least. It is a very good example of cherry picking, and just like Ansel Keys did, where he selected the 7 nations that fit his model. That's what they sort of did with the blue zones. There are other. They said, oh, these are very, and also there's a difference between uh, the conclusion that the author makes and the actual data that they provided and discovered. And so they looked at this information and said, oh, these are very, very high plant consumption. These are plant-based people. Therefore, it's a plant-based lifestyle that helped this. But that's not necessarily the case. I mean, there's, again, correlation is not causation. So if you look at these blue zone studies, they selectively pick these areas and that have higher than average life expectancy for the area, and that's great. But they didn't look at places such as Hong Kong that have the highest meat consumption per capita in the world, and they also have the highest average life expectancy from birth in the world. So they just happen to forget this one. They also put a lot of weight on the plant-based lifestyle, but not all of them were actually plant-based. You look at Okinawa, they actually eat a lot of pork, and some people, when they talk about the Blue Zone study, they're very careful with how they word these things. They say, oh, they eat barely any red meat. I was like, okay, well, what about other meat? You know, it was like, I always look at these things. I always look for weasel words. These modifiers that change the whole direction of the sentence. They say, oh yeah, they don't hardly eat any red meat, this, that, and the other, and they think, oh, plant based,
Hmm.
not red meat. Oh, they're vegetarian. No, they're not. They eat a ton of pork. They actually eat more meat than the average Japanese.
Mm.
Okay, so they're more meat based than the average Japanese person, yet they live longer. Okay, so why is that? Maybe it's more meat because they eat more meat, But there's
Hmm.
also social structures. There's smoking, drinking, all these sorts of things that they may or may not do, which will certainly influence their life. Loma Linda was one of these examples, and Loma Linda is a Seventh Day Adventist community, and Loma Linda, medical school and hospital. They put out a lot of very one-sided um, studies and things like that, talking about plant-based things. But they have a bias in there, so you have to have to wonder about that. But these guys are religious. They live good lives. They're
Hmm.
family oriented. They don't smoke. They don't drink as much as the rest of the population in America, which also is going to increase their lifespan. There was someone pointed out that Mormons in the same area who you know don't have any sort of dietary restrictions according to their religion, they have the exact same increase in their life expectancy than as people in Loma Linda. So I mean, this is more likely to do with the fact that they're not smoking, not drinking, not doing drugs, and they didn't pick the Mormons as a blue zone, even though they're actually doing better than the rest of the average American is, and but they eat meat. So I think that there were a lot of different ways to have concerns about that study, and a lot of different ways to interpret it, because they took that information and said must be because they eat plants. They don't actually eat
Hmm.
that as much plants as compared to other people do, except for the Loma Linda people. But that's there's a difference there for another reason. So yeah, I think at the very least it's dead wrong, like and
What
and
I
and probably and at worst I would say you have to be concerned about their intentions, and if this was
hmm
actual intentional misleading of people. But at the very least it's dead wrong.
That's right. And what's cool about this is what I'm also hearing is if you're listening to this episode, you're a vegan, a vegetarian, and you follow that way of thinking, have at it. Like if that works for you, have at it. But if you're also saying Hong Kong is doing even better and they're eating a ton of meat, and by the way, they probably was eating pig, in the blue zones. But the bottom line is that if you like that way of eating, have at it. My biggest message is about metabolic health, and like all I'm saying to people is, if it works for you, have at it. But please don't demonize what I'm doing when I eat my steak. You know what I mean? It's like that's working too, and I have so many people who have healed. So if you're watching this and you're plant based, have at it. Just understand there's some things about that you need to understand so you won't become deficient. And if you're a carnivore, have at it. Just understand that at the end of the day, I do what's best for my body. And I just want people to stop demonizing a dietary pattern that is helping people, which would be the low carb, keto, carnivore dietary pattern. So you've given us some nuggets in terms of maybe changing some belief systems. But I know that carnivore sounds very simple, right? I saw your video again where you kind of cut up your meat, and that's all you ate was some salt and water. So a typical day for you. I mean, the video kind of gave us the insights, but what's a typical day for you in terms of what you eat as a carnivore? What's typical?
Yeah, quite often it will be red meat like beef, and I like steaks, and the price of beef has gone crazy, and so like ribeyes have like literally doubled in price. So sometimes if I feel like getting some, and other times I think that's just ridiculous, and I'll buy New York's at half the price, and so do that, or like chuck steak or something like that. But 99% of what I eat is beef, and fatty beef at that. And so I'll usually eat once a day, usually in the evening. I just feel better like that.
Hmm.
I always had a natural instinct to, like, play rugby and train and play games hungry. I always played hungry, and I always felt better for that. And then eating afterwards. Now I sort of think of it, there might be some sort of physiological reason for that. Like if your body's giving you energy, like, hey, you need to go get your kill, you got to go hunt, you got to go, and then you go get it and you eat, and your body says, right, shut it down, conserve energy, don't waste any of it. And so that's sort of how I think about it. Is I'm going around, I'm hunting all day, and then I get home and I have my thing, and I just
Right.
so that's sort of I could be completely off, but that's how I think about it, and I feel good on that. So I do that. So I get up in the morning. I don't need to eat breakfast. I just get up and I go, and I feel fine. I have tons of energy. I don't need to stop for lunch. I don't really get slowed down going towards dinner, towards the end of the day. I just go and I do my work and I get things done. And then I work out after work if I have time to. And then I get home and I just have a big steak, and it's usually beef. And if it's lean, like in Australia, they've really taken to heart the whole fat is bad thing. And so they've even bred their cows to be lean, like really lean. And so, you get these things, and even if you get like a ribeye, the ribeyes are going to be more lean, but then they trim these to an absolute fault. They just cut off every ounce of meat on the exterior, and it just does my head in. So
That's
I mean, it's criminal, honestly. I even find, I love Costco. Like, it's like my favorite store, but like I went to the Costco here and they had these big tomahawk ribeyes. So I would get those because they actually had like the fat, like untrimmed, and they just had a lot of fat on it. So I'm like, great, that's what I'm going to get. And I talked to the guy who got like a case of them. So it was like, 18 of these things. It was a big expense, but it was slightly cheaper, not really. It was like $20 cheaper. It was like, no, hashtag not worth it. But like they came back, and so I didn't see them because they were in the box, right? Because they were all sealed from the slaughterhouse and the processing plant. And they came back, and they had actually like trimmed off the fat cap on the ribeyes.
oh
What the hell
god.
is that? It was just like a sirloin on a stick, and I was so pissed. And I took it back. I was just like, this is not okay. And the guy tried to argue with me, like, oh, well, what do you, there's nothing wrong with the meat. Like, the quality of the meat is fine. I'm like, listen, buddy, there's nothing wrong with hamburger either, but that's not what I bought. That's not what I paid for.
Right.
You cut the cap off of a ribeye. It's not a ribeye anymore.
Right.
If I wanted sirloin, I would have got it at a third the price, so that was a problem. But when things are a bit more lean, I'll generally like melt butter into it. So that's why I try to get my fat content up, is by putting a bit of butter on it. But yeah, that's it. Generally, I'll have some pork, usually like pork bellies, eggs as well sometimes. Not as much chicken, but if I do, I get like dark meat with the skin on. But it's usually a bit leaner than I want, and so. Usually just stick with beef. I tend to feel the best with beef, and so that's what I do. Just a big old meal of fatty beef, and then I'm good for like 24 hours.
That's amazing. What's funny as I think about you as a busy neurosurgical resident, most doctors start their day with coffee, and most doctors after 36 hours end their day with some Chardonnay or something. So it sounds like you're not doing coffee and you're not doing alcohol as well.
No, yeah, no, I don't touch any of it. They're all plants, and so I don't do any of that. Like, and, I've rarely drank coffee anyway. I always felt a bit worse when I did that. I don't know if it's just allergies. Sometimes I'll have like dusts and molds, or it could just be the toxins in there. You think about how bitter coffee is. That bitter taste is our brain and our tongue recognizing harmful chemicals. That's what taste is. If it's something tastes bitter, there's something in it that's bad for you, and it's telling you, hey, just spit this out. And that's why kids have like a they say, oh, you haven't got their adult palate yet. They haven't browbeaten their senses into submission and saying like, no, eat the poison. But when kids are eating broccoli or having coffee, like they're appalled that anyone would touch this stuff. And so there's obviously stuff in there, but I tend to feel better when I don't drink it anyway. And then when I went carnivore, I really felt a lot better. And so I thought that, well, maybe I'll try like a caffeine pill or something like that, because that would just have the caffeine and I won't have 150,000 other chemicals in coffee that I don't want. And, it's fine. It gave me a bit of energy. Actually, it felt good with the caffeine, but then the caffeine wears off. And I felt sort of crummy, like I was coming down off a drug, which obviously, you are, for the rest of the day. And I felt that on balance, that few hours of bonus energy that I had wasn't worth the next 10 hours of feeling crummy, or 12 hours. And so I just felt better without it. So yeah, I don't drink coffee. If I drink alcohol, it's on very special occasions, and it's less than once a year. I mean, it would be
Mm-hmm.
hardly ever. And so I had a friend of mine who was getting married. I hadn't seen him in years, and I was just like, okay, it was like an Irish wedding. And it's just like it's like drinking is very much involved at Irish weddings, and so I was like, all right, well, I'll drink at this. But that was like the first time I drank in like 18 months, and I haven't really drank since then. So I noticed that even though I'm not really hungover the next day, my energy levels and my exercise tolerance is severely curtailed for actually 3 full weeks. So it isn't until like the fourth week that I can actually do the amount of exercise when I really that I can push myself as hard as I normally do at the gym. Before that, I'm just feeling like, I just get tired more easily, and I'm still doing more than other people would, but I would get more tired compared to myself. And it's like, that's not right. That's not what I want.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, if I were to drink, it would have to be something that's worth, feeling suboptimal and not being able to work out properly and having good energy levels for a full month. So that just puts you into a very different perspective. It's not like, oh, I don't want to be hungover tomorrow. It's like, I don't want to be screwed for a month, so
Mm-hmm.
that just naturally sort of keeps that in check. So I very rarely drink, and yeah, I don't drink coffee. I find it just better that way.
Yeah, I've been avoiding coffee. I know you recently had A-Day Fox, the Black Carnivore, on a video on YouTube and a podcast, and she talked about she still struggles with that coffee thing. A lot of doctors struggle with that coffee thing, but we all realize, including me, that if I don't drink coffee, I do much better. How about let's just get more sleep? How about
Yeah.
that? If you get more sleep, then you won't need that stimulant from coffee. And so I know we're getting close to the hour. I wanted to ask you another quick question about fruit. Many people consider fruit nature's candy, but they don't always understand why we feel that way. So just a few quick thoughts about why do you think fruit can be harmful instead of helpful to us?
Yeah. Well, I think it's in the name right there. It is nature's candy. And candy's bad. So we recognize candy as not being healthy, and so just putting nature on the front of it doesn't really help that. I mean, arsenic's natural, right? But
Right.
but it's nature's arsenic, so that means it's good. No. So yeah, so it is candy, and candy has fructose and sugar, and fructose is just plainly bad for you. That's some of the best evidence that we have in nutritional biochemistry is the fact that fructose causes harm, and there are studies that show causation between metabolic syndrome and fructose consumption. We also have what I think is better evidence, which is hard biochemistry from the University of California in San Francisco that mapped out the biochemical pathways in our body that fructose takes. And when it's processed by our liver, fructose gets broken down into the same byproducts as ethanol, alcohol, right? So you get the same damage from those breakdown products from fructose as you do alcohol. And so you get fatty liver disease, cirrhosis, diabetes, heart disease, and it's even implicated in cancer and Alzheimer's. I mean, Alzheimer's is being called by many people now type 3 diabetes because of these similar metabolic features that you find with insulin resistance and penetrance of energy into the organ and so forth. And well, that's very likely that's obviously true because they likely have the same cause. Is it
Hmm.
sugar and excess carbohydrates and hyperinsulinemia are going to contribute to this. So fruit, while being natural, is still going to be harmful because fructose is harmful in and of itself. Now, there may be other nutrients there that are better for you and add to the equation than just table sugar, and that's great. but that doesn't mean that the fructose is good for you. It just means that you're getting some vitamin C in the bargain. But if you mix cocaine with vitamin C and say, "Oh, I'm doing this for my health," I mean, you're not fooling anyone, you know. And so that's the same thing with fruit and even honey. You know, honey is bees' food, and that may be good for a bee, but we're not bees. And
That's right.
you know, while there might be nutrients in there that are good for us too, because we're also living organisms that need certain things, that's great. But the fructose is bad. The fructose will always
Mm-hmm.
be bad. So while it can be better than table sugar, it's still not going to be as good as a steak, and it will cause harm too. There was even a study that came out recently. I forget where it came out, but it showed that people who ate more fruit, it was actually a controlled trial, and they had people who were eating more pieces of fruit, people eating less fruit. The fruit cohort actually worsened their fatty liver disease. So this was in a
Mm.
cohort of people that already had fatty liver disease and metabolic disease, and the people who ate more fruit worsened their problem. You know, so the idea that, oh well, it's probably safe. Well, it's probably not. You know, because fructose is still fructose. Now you get it with a bit of fiber, and fiber as you know, is one of the reasons I don't like fiber, is because it blocks the absorption of nutrients. So it'll actually block the absorption of some of the fructose as well. So you're not going to absorb as much fructose from an apple with the fiber as you will from juicing that and drinking it. But you're still going to absorb some, and that some that goes in and gets to your liver will cause the same problems as fructose from any other source.
Love it. So for all those watching this video, fruit is nature's candy. So it's okay if you're not carnivore and you want to have it periodically, have at it. But it's a snack food. It's not a health food for most of us. And you mentioned bees and bee vomit, which is honey, is not a health food. Are there benefits in there? Maybe, but it's not a health food, and it's not exactly a source of the nutrition that you're seeking. So I appreciate those comments about fruit. And the second to last question I really want to ask you is about, and this will be very brief. You didn't mention a lot of time for exercise, yet when we see you in your videos, you have a nice muscular frame. So is less more? How do you maintain your body? This can't just be muscle memory. uh, how often are you really getting exercise in per week?
Yeah, so it very much fluctuates. Obviously I've come from a highly active background, and so I've built up a lot of musculature over the decades, and I was in very very good shape in my teens and 20s and even 30s when I was playing rugby, competitively at a very high level and working out all the time. It really wasn't until I actually went to Bangladesh and stopped that I really stopped playing competitive rugby in my late 30s. And then I came back and I was getting back into rugby, and then I sort of had issues with my knee and I wasn't able to sort of finish the season. And then sort of after that, I sort of played a bit of seasons after that. And now I'm just way too busy. So, but it was up until very recently, I was working out a lot all the time. Now that I'm carnivore, though, I'm able to just maintain that. So it's not, um, it's I don't know if you call it muscle memory, but it's just my physique just doesn't go away. Now I'm not
Hmm.
working out as much. I'm not stimulating it as much, so I won't be as bulky as I would be otherwise. I think I'm like
Hmm.
225 at the moment. I'll go between sort of 220 or even 215 and 240 depending on how much I work out. So right now I've started sort of working out again, and I've sort of put on a bit of bulk, but my body fat percentage will always stay the same. And so I'll have a muscular physique, but I won't be as bulky. Um, at the moment, I was working out quite steadily up until about November of last year, and I was maintaining about 240 pounds and on a
Hmm.
heavy frame. And then after that, I've really only been able to work out. I mean, it really wasn't that much. I mean, maybe
Hmm.
once every month. Sometimes it would be a couple months before I would get to the gym, but I still stayed slender. And because I had this musculature, even though it wasn't as bulky, it looked like I'm ripped or whatever. But from a body fat percentage, I had low body fat percentage, and I had that musculature. But
Hmm.
um, compared to myself, otherwise, I certainly wasn't as bulky. But now I started using like the X3 bar just because I've heard good things, and I
Mm-hmm.
interviewed Dr. Jaquish on my show and just sort of got interested in that and the variable resistance sort of idea of it. Whereas the further you go with the lift, it actually becomes harder.
Mm-hmm.
So you're working your muscles
Mm-hmm.
in proportion to your strength curve because you're stronger at maximal contraction of the muscle, obviously, than before that. Your actin fibers are all lined up, and
That's right.
with strong contraction. So I started doing that, and I just did this sort of 30-day sort of X bar challenge, which is not the normal routine, but I just said, I'm going to just do it every day. I'm carnivore. I recover really fast. I don't get sore. I'm just going to do it every single day. I'm just going to do this exercise. And because it only takes like 10 minutes to do
Mm-hmm.
the sort of 4 or 5 exercises that you do, I can just bang it out. And
Mm-hmm.
I did this thing and just said, I'm going to do this 30-day challenge just so that I could get back into a routine and just like no excuses. I'm not going to skip a day. And, come what may, I'm doing this. And so I'm getting back into it. But before that, it was really like once a month, probably on average
Yeah.
since November. So yeah, it really is quite remarkable just how much your body maintains its physique just through diet, and
Yes,
yeah.
that's the key. That's the key, and that's what I'm hearing, like, eat the right diet. Lions don't have an obesity problem, right? They may be skinny because they haven't eaten, but we have the luxury of being able to get the food. So if we get the food and we're eating the right diet, we should be, okay. And I'm also hearing, sometimes less is more. So, 10 minutes with the bar, the X3 bar, that's what you're doing. So that's really exciting as well. So for those who are, trying to get to that special place with their body, there's many ways to get there, but trying to be efficient. I use Dr. Ben Bokikio's approach, 15 minutes twice a week because I'm so busy, and that works for me. I walk, I do other things, stretch, but mainly I just hit it a couple of times a week for a short amount of time to muscle failure, and then let the muscles heal, recover, and grow. So I appreciate that. So as we wrap up, my friend, as it relates to my nest and rope, and as you think about your next 12 months, do you have certain parts of your life, whether it's nutrition, exercise, less stress, more sleep, how you think, recovering from trauma, having healthy relationships, avoiding organisms or pollutants that harm you, and or protecting your emotions and making sure your life experiences serve you? Where do you see where on that nest and rope spectrum do you plan to focus your attention?
Well, I do try to do well as much. I try to cover as much of those as I can because I completely agree that very, very important. It all ties together. I think for me, my main issue is the nutrition side of things. Is because I think that's a very, very important part of that. If you're not giving your body its correct fuel, you're not going to run properly. It's like you can have a Ferrari and know exactly how to drive it and maintain it, but if you put diesel into a gas engine, like you're just going to ruin it. And so I think of that as the same thing. We're precision, machines, and we need to be fueled as such. I do try to exercise as well. It's something that makes me feel much better. And when I do take the time to exercise, I find that I have actually more energy throughout the rest of the day. So while I'm losing the time that I took to go exercise, I actually find that I'm more efficient with the rest of the time that I have, and I sleep better as well. Sleep is something that I struggle with because I just don't have time sometimes. And so, the last couple of days, I've only been getting like a couple hours of sleep, and
Mm,
and then sort of, working all day. Yesterday, I got home very late, probably around 12 o'clock, and then ate for the first time in like 30 hours, and and then probably passed out probably like 1:30, and then like slept for like 11 hours. So
mhm,
it
right.
was that was me sort of catching up. So I really value sleep, but sometimes it's difficult. And then stress, I find myself far less stressed eating this way. I'm much more
Mhm,
chill. I can just take whatever comes, and I can just deal with
mhm,
it a lot easier. And so while things can be very stressful, I try not to let them overwhelm me. I just recognize that I have a job to do and I need to get certain things done. And I just just take them, one step at a time. And obviously, maintaining friendships and relationships is a very important thing. We are social creatures, and we're not going to be as happy as we could be if we don't have strong personal connections and bonds with other people. And not having as much time as I would like to can be difficult with that. But just staying in touch with people through text or messaging, and then calls to family or my girlfriend, definitely helps with that, and just spending nice time with people. So I think that that's as much as I'm able to do with all that, with the time that I have. But some of them do go lacking just because things can get a bit much with just my work. But
That's right.
I definitely try to focus on those as much as I can.
Well, thank you again. We appreciate your sacrifice today, the work you're doing on your YouTube channel and elsewhere, Facebook, etc. We'll make sure to have a link to all of your resources so people can connect with you, especially for those who are finding you for the first time. So I definitely want to thank you for spending time on the Protecting Your Nest podcast. I hope that this conversation has helped some folk, and I just thank you, and let's continue to work together.
I would absolutely love that. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And I will say this as we wrap up this episode. If I can speak for all the carnivores throughout the world, we appreciate Dr. Chaffee. And by the way, Dr. Chaffee, I like that first name, two Tonys on the,
Yeah.
on the just throwing that out there.
Yeah.
So we appreciate you as you spread the message that carnivore can be a great option for those who are looking to heal metabolically. So we definitely want you to keep up the great work, and we appreciate that. And for those who have joined us today, I encourage you to check out Dr. Chaffee's channel. And because I really believe that his work is going to help many people heal. So I'm just happy that he's another voice in the carnivore community, joining the Sean Bakers and the A-Day Foxes of the world to spread this healing message. So thank you again for coming to this episode. And as I always say, continue to be safe, be well, and continue to protect your nest.